The first time Father Elias saw the boy, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't the child's silence that unsettled him, nor the way he stared, unblinking, as if his eyes had never known sleep. It wasn't even the boy's strange scent, like old stone and burnt paper, that caused Father Elias to pause mid-sermon. No, it was the way the shadows around the boy moved ever so slightly, even when the boy sat still. St. Mark's Church had always been a quiet place. Weathered stone arches wrapped around its modest sanctuary, and the pews, though seldom full, whispered with the prayers of the faithful. Father Elias had tended the church for over 30 years, preaching to the dwindling congregation, offering solace to the grieving, and baptizing the occasional infant. He had always believed in demons, of course, but belief is a tidy thing when locked in the pages of a holy book. The boy arrived during a storm, ushered in by a trembling woman who refused to give her name. Her clothes were soaked through, her shoes lost in the mud outside. She held the child's hand with the grip of desperation, her knuckles white, her lips murmuring prayers that sounded older than any scripture Elias knew. She looked into his eyes with a kind of knowing fear and whispered, "He won't stop whispering to me." Before he could ask what she meant, she shoved the boy forward and fled into the night. The doors slammed shut behind her, as if sealed by the wind itself. The child said nothing. His eyes were dark, not black, but like looking into a cave where no light could ever reach. He wore no coat despite the chill, and when Elias offered him one, the boy only tilted his head and said, "They don't like warmth." It began subtly. Elias would find candles extinguished when he was certain he had lit them. The crucifix above the altar shifted slightly to the left each morning. Pages from the Bible turned on their own. The boy never left the back pew, never slept, never blinked. He watched. Late at night, Elias would hear faint scratching behind the stone walls, fingers clawing at something unseen. At first, he assumed rats. But when he pressed his ear to the cold surface, he heard voices, too faint to make out. They didn't speak in any language he recognized, but he understood them in his bones. They were not speaking to him, they were speaking about him. Then came the dreams. Elias, robed in black, walked endless corridors beneath the church, where the walls bled ink and the floor pulsed like flesh. The boy was always there, standing just beyond the lantern light, whispering to figures Elias could not see. When Elias would wake, his hands trembled. He could still feel the heat of unseen eyes on his skin. He brought in specialists. A doctor came and said the boy was mute but healthy. A psychologist came and said the boy was disassociative, traumatized perhaps, but they didn't stay long. The doctor left his bag behind in his rush to flee. The psychologist locked herself in her car for over an hour before driving off without ever explaining why. Father Elias turned to the church. He sent letters, described the behavior, requested intervention. The replies were slow in coming, cautious in tone. "Monitor the child," they said. "Pray over him, keep records," as if prayer and ink could banish what this boy carried. The parishioners began to dwindle. They claimed the air in the church felt heavy, thick, like syrup. Some said they heard whispering during Mass, low voices coming from beneath the floorboards. One woman claimed she saw hands reaching through the altar cloth. No one would sit near the boy. Children cried at the sight of him. Dogs refused to enter the church at all. Elias tried to speak to the child again. He sat beside him, slowly, hands folded, voice gentle. "What is your name?" The boy turned his head, eyes gleaming, and whispered, "I have so many." Elias pressed further. "Why are you here?" "To remind," the boy said. "To open." "Open what?" Elias asked. The boy did not answer. Instead, he began to hum, a low, droning tune that made the windows tremble in their frames. The next night, Elias heard movement beneath the floor. He descended into the crypts, narrow stone halls once used for burial centuries ago, The air grew colder as he walked. Candles flickered violently, throwing shadows that danced like mocking silhouettes. In the deepest chamber, where the oldest graves rested behind rusted gates, he saw symbols drawn in soot and blood. They spiraled across the walls and floor, ancient and jagged, like letters from a forgotten tongue. At the center of the room lay an opened book, one Elias had never seen before. Its pages were parchment thin and covered in ink that seemed to writhe when looked at directly. He reached for it, but the temperature dropped so suddenly that his breath froze mid-air. A voice, clear and serpentine, hissed from behind him. "Not yet!" Elias turned. The boy stood in the doorway, though he had never seen him enter. "You must see," the boy said. "You must remember." From that moment on, Elias could no longer sleep. When he closed his eyes, he was drawn downward, into visions of stone, chambers and clawed hands, of cities crumbling into ash, of voices rising in joyless song. He watched the stars fall from the sky. He watched angels weep as the earth split open. He found himself muttering prayers in languages he did not know. He scratched sigils into the wood of the pews with his fingernails until they bled. Parishioners stopped coming entirely. The bishop finally sent someone to investigate. Father Thomas arrived, young and confident. He wore his collar neatly and carried his Bible as if it were armor. He met the boy and did not flinch. "I've seen troubled children before," he said. "He just needs guidance." That night Father Thomas was found in the courtyard. His hair had turned completely white. He could not speak. He clutched a rosary so tightly it had embedded into his palm. When the medics carried him away, he screamed only one word: "Open." Alone. Now Elias wandered the church halls by candlelight. The boy no longer hid his presence. He moved freely, always smiling, always humming. Sometimes Elias would see figures standing beside him, tall, indistinct things with limbs too long and joints that bent the wrong way. They never spoke, they only watched. In the final days, the sky over the church darkened. No matter the hour, the clouds remained thick and unmoving. The sun refused to shine through them. Thunder rumbled constantly, though there was no rain. The bells rang on their own at midnight, and each time they did, Elias lost more of himself. He began to write obsessively, filling pages with drawings, names, and diagrams of things he could not understand. He no longer ate, no longer prayed. His sermons, when he tried to give them, dissolved into a litany of babbling chants. He had become the church's last parishioner, and still the boy smiled. Then came the final night. Elias stood at the altar, robe hanging from his gaunt frame. The crucifix above him began to melt, dripping waxen tears down its wooden face. The candles blew out all at once. The doors opened of their own accord, and the boy stepped forward. The shadows peeled from the walls. They came together, swirling behind him, coalescing into a shape that defied reason. It had faces, but no eyes. It had limbs, but no form. It breathed, but did not live. The church groaned as if in agony. "You will see," the boy said. "You will remember what you are." Elias fell to his knees. He felt something inside him unravel, a cord that had held him together for all his life. And in that unspooling silence, he remembered. He remembered the tower of flame and the screaming skies. He remembered the pact made beneath a blood-red moon. He remembered the creature carved from absence, buried beneath stone and silence. He remembered the demon he had once bound, and now it was free. The church collapsed that night. The newspapers blamed age and neglect. No one mentioned the boy, nor the man they never found. But some nights, when the air is still and the moon is low, people say you can hear music drifting from beneath the ruins. A child's humming tune, and the low murmur of voices speaking a truth too old to forget. And if you listen long enough, you too will remember. I never used to be afraid of clowns. As a child, I remember birthday parties and circus visits where clowns handed out balloon animals and sprayed water from plastic flowers, their painted faces exaggerated in ways meant to make us laugh. I never feared them. Not until I moved into the little house at the edge of Delwyn Street, not until the laughing started, and not until the dreams began bleeding into the daylight. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After my parents passed, I wanted something quiet. I found the house online. It was older, yes, with creaky floors and rust on the hinges, but the price was unusually low. I asked why, and the real estate agent just smiled and said, "Old homes come with old stories, but that doesn't mean they're true." I moved in during the first week of October. The leaves were just beginning to fall, and the wind carried the scent of bonfires and distant rain. The first few nights were uneventful. The house was quiet, if a little drafty. I rearranged furniture, painted a few rooms, and settled in. But on the fourth night, I heard laughter. It was faint at first, soft, high-pitched, and distant. I thought it was the television, but the screen was dark and the house was silent. I stood in the hallway listening. The laughter came again, clearer now, as if someone were hiding just beyond sight. I checked every room. Nothing. I went outside, thinking maybe a neighbor's window was open, but the street was still. I told myself it was nothing, an echo perhaps, or a trick of the wind. The next day, I found a balloon tied to the gate in the front yard. Red, glossy, bobbing gently in the breeze. I didn't own any balloons, and no children lived nearby. There was no note, no sign of a party. I popped it, chalked it up to a prank, and threw it away. That night the laughter returned, closer this time. As I lay in bed it came from the hallway again, soft giggles, rising and falling like a music box winding down. I turned on every light. In the house, searching, but found nothing. When I went back to bed, my pillow was cold. Too cold. I flipped it over and found a smear of red face paint on the underside, in the shape of a half-moon smile. The dreams began soon after. Vivid, disturbing dreams in which I wandered endless corridors lined with mirrors. My reflection would follow, delayed by half a second, always smiling too widely, always wearing white makeup and red lips. I would run, but the mirrors never ended. At the heart of the labyrinth, a clown waited. His outfit was yellowed and stained, his face makeup cracked like old porcelain. He didn't speak. He just pointed at me and laughed until the sound pierced like needles. I started leaving the lights on at night. Sleep became difficult. The house groaned louder than it should have. One morning, I awoke to find clown shoes, oversized, red and white, placed neatly at the foot of my bed. That same day, I called the realtor. She sounded surprised, maybe too surprised. When I asked if anything strange had happened in the house before, she paused for a long time before saying, "Well, the previous owner did." Entertain? He was a children's party performer, retired, lived alone. They said he died in his sleep. "Where?" I asked. "In the bedroom," she replied, "the one you're sleeping in." I didn't sleep that night. Around midnight, I heard a thud downstairs, not a creak or groan, but the sound of something heavy landing. I tiptoed down, flashlight in hand. In the living room, the couch cushions had been torn open, stuffing littered the floor like snow. In the center sat a clown doll, old, filthy, with button eyes and a wide grin. I had never owned such a doll. Tried to throw it away, but the next morning it was back on the living room floor, a little closer to the hallway this time. Each night it moved, always a few feet closer to my room. I began to hallucinate, or what I thought were hallucinations. In reflections, I'd catch glimpses of bright red hair, or a pair of oversized gloved hands slipping out of sight. Once, I caught a whisper behind me, and turned to see a face vanish into the wall. Its eyes were hollow. Its smile was far too large. Neighbors started avoiding me. Mrs. Campbell across the street stopped waving when I came outside. A boy on a bicycle dropped his toy clown on my lawn and refused to pick it up, staring at the house with wide, unblinking eyes before riding off. I stopped going outside. Inside, the house changed. The walls creaked even when the wind was still. Paintings I had hung straight now tilted. Floorboards groaned under unseen footsteps. At night I could hear faint music, circus tunes twisted and slow like they were being played underwater. Then the voices began. They didn't come from outside or even within the walls. They came from behind me, always behind. Whispered jokes, puns, nonsense rhymes spoken in playful tones. Why did the clown cross the mind? To tickle your thoughts from behind. I would wake up to balloons floating near the ceiling, drifting lazily down as if waiting for me to acknowledge them. One morning I found a message written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. Let's smile together. I tried to leave, packed a bag, opened the door, stepped outside, and suddenly I was back inside, in the hallway, holding the same bag. The door still open, but beyond it, only darkness. No street, no sky, just black. I tried again and again, but each time I walked out, I looped back in. The house had closed in around me. There were no clocks anymore, no days or nights, only gray light from windows that no longer showed the outside. I don't know how long I've been here now. Time doesn't work right anymore. Sometimes I hear the laughter all at once from every corner of the house. Sometimes I wake with my face painted, though I never feel the brushstrokes. The clown doll now sleeps beside me in bed. He whispers sometimes. He tells me stories about laughter, about how smiles can stretch so far they tear, about the joy of confusion, the beauty of never being sure what's real. The mirrors in the house are no longer mine. When I look, I see the clown staring back. His eyes are my eyes. His grin is mine. And he always moves just a second before I do, like he's showing me the way forward. I think he's winning. I think he's always been here, waiting in this house under the floorboards, behind the glass, smiling in the shadows. And I think soon I'll smile with him. For real this time. If someone finds this, if anyone ever does, don't look into. The mirror's too long. Don't listen to the laughter. And whatever you do, never accept the balloon. I was never afraid of the dark. Even as a child, I found comfort in it. Light always seemed too loud, too sharp, like it exposed things that were better left hidden. But that changed the year I moved into the old cottage outside Worm Hollow. Had taken a leave of absence from work. Burnout, they called it. My doctor prescribed rest and silence, a kind of self-exile. The cottage had no neighbors, no reception, and no electricity. It was meant to be a digital detox, a return to quiet. I thought it would help me heal. The first few days were uneventful. The cottage was small but solid. Stone walls, thick wooden beams, a fireplace, and a cellar that remained cool even in the summer. During the day, I chopped wood, read old books, and cooked on a propane stove. At night, I lit candles and watched the stars appear through the skylight above the bed. The silence was deep and total, but it didn't feel oppressive. Not at first. I had brought a flashlight and extra batteries, just in case. But I rarely used them. I liked the flickering glow of candles. It reminded me of something ancient and steady. But on the fifth night, something strange happened. I lit a candle as usual, but the flame went out instantly. I tried again, the same. I checked for drafts, but the air was still. I used the flashlight, deciding it was just a fluke. But the batteries drained faster than they should have. Within minutes. I replaced them, but the beam of light flickered, stuttered, and died. It was only 8 in the evening, but the darkness outside was already thick, pressing against the windows like it was alive. That night I kept several candles around me and read by the fire. But even the fire seemed dimmer, as though something in the room was swallowing the light. I felt watched. I told myself it was nerves, or maybe the isolation. But then I heard the knocking. 3 slow knocks. not at the door. From within the walls. I froze. The sound came again, fainter, like fingertips on wood, deliberate and spaced. I searched the room with the flashlight, which sputtered back to life for a moment, revealing nothing. The walls were bare stone and timber. No one could be hiding there. I slept with the candle lit, or tried to. Around 2 in the morning, I awoke in total darkness. The candle had gone out again. My body felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. My ears rang with silence so deep it hurt. Then came the whisper, a single word. Down. I leapt from the bed, lighting the candle again, this time shielding it from the air with my hands. The flame held. I checked every room. Nothing. But the cellar door was ajar. I hadn't opened the cellar since I arrived. It smelled of damp stone and soil, the kind of scent that never leaves. I closed the door, locked it, and returned to bed. The next morning I found the lock snapped in half on the floor. I tried to leave. I packed a bag ready to walk the miles back to town. But outside, the world had changed. A fog so thick I could barely see my own feet rolled over the ground. I followed the path toward the road, but after half an hour, I found myself standing in front of the cottage again. I don't know how many times I tried to leave that day. It always brought me back. The sky was dim, gray, and never changed. It never grew darker or lighter. Time stood still. Inside, the candles had all melted down. I lit a match, but it burned blue and vanished in a puff. The flashlight was dead again. I was trapped in the dark. The cellar door was wide open. I nailed it shut. That night I sat in the center of the room with every candle lit, surrounded by their flickering halos. The shadows still danced at the edge of the light, longer than they should have been. They twisted and stretched, sometimes stopping, like they were listening. I fell asleep at some point, and I woke in darkness. Not normal darkness, absolute suffocating black. I could not see my hands in front of my face. I groped for the candles, the matches, the flashlight. All were gone, and then I heard breathing, not mine. Deep and wet, inches from my ear. I froze. The breathing continued, slow and calm, like someone crouched beside me, watching. I screamed. The sound felt swallowed, as if the darkness devoured even noise. Then came the scratching, all around me, on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, like dozens of fingers tracing lines in the wood. I tried to move but couldn't. My limbs were locked in place as though the dark itself held me, and then the voice came again, whispering, laughing, not human. Down. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke, it was still dark, but the fireplace was burning again. I didn't light it. I don't think I could have. My matches were still gone. The candles melted into formless puddles. The light was wrong, too orange, too low, casting long black shapes across the room. The cellar door was open again. This time, I felt drawn to it, not curious, pulled, against reason, against fear. I took a piece of wood from the fireplace, its end still glowing, and descended into the cellar. The steps groaned beneath my weight. The air grew colder, wetter. The shadows clung to the walls like spider webs. The cellar was empty at first. Then I saw them, symbols carved into the stone, circles within circles, lines that twisted into spirals. They moved when I looked directly at them, twitching like worms. In the center of the floor was a hole, a perfect circle, impossibly black. It didn't smell of soil or dampness. It smelled of absence, of vacuum. The wooden torch dimmed as I approached, and then I heard the whispers rise again. They were clearer now, voices layered upon voices. Some cried, some laughed, some begged. They were not from below. They were behind me. I turned slowly and saw nothing, but I felt it, a presence, ancient, patient. The shadows in the cellar pulsed like a heartbeat. The walls exhaled, and the darkness in the hole rippled. I dropped the torch. It went out before it hit the ground. Ran back up the stairs, back to the locked door, except it wasn't locked anymore. I slammed it shut and barricaded it with everything I could find. The darkness had grown bolder. It came during the day now, curling around corners, creeping through cracks. I couldn't keep it out. The sun never rose again. I kept writing, keeping track, trying to anchor myself in something real. But the darkness doesn't care. It doesn't sleep. It waits. It watches. I can feel it inside me now. When I close my eyes, I see the whole, the perfect endless circle. I hear the voices. Sometimes I speak with them. I don't remember what I say, only that when I open my eyes, something has moved. Last night I found a mirror. There hadn't been one before. In it, I saw the room behind me just as it was, but I was gone. Only the shadow stood where I should have been, rising from the floor, shaped like me, but not me. They smiled. I can't light candles anymore. They won't hold a flame. The fireplace refuses to catch. My matches strike nothing. The flashlight no longer exists. I don't remember when it disappeared. There is no light. There is only the dark. It watches. And now it whispers not from the cellar or the walls or behind me, but from inside me. It tells me I was never alone. It tells me I brought it with me. And worst of all, it tells me I was always meant to go down. It began with a letter. A thick envelope, yellowed with age, arrived one cold autumn morning. No return address. Only my name, handwritten in elegant cursive I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page, also handwritten, inviting me to visit. A property that had been left to me in a will. The house belonged to a distant relative I had never met, a great-aunt named Eliza, who had passed away weeks prior. There was something about the letter that felt off. Not sinister, just heavy, like it carried more than words. I read it again and again, drawn to the name of the estate, Black Hollow House. The name stirred something in me, a faint echo, like a song half remembered. The house stood far from the city, nestled in the hills of a forgotten town, where the fog never seemed to lift and the roads twisted like ribbon through the woods. When I arrived, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that made it hard to tell what time of day it was. The house rose above the trees like it had been waiting. It was enormous, Victorian in style, with tall, narrow windows, a wraparound porch, and shutters that hung crooked like eyes half closed in sleep. The iron gate creaked when I pushed it open. Vines had grown up the sides of the house, and the front door bore a knocker shaped like a weeping angel. I expected someone to meet me, but the place was empty. The key had been in the envelope. It turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened with a sound like a breath held for too long. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust clung to every surface. The furniture was old, ornate, covered in white sheets. The walls were lined with portraits, dozens of them, all in dark frames. Their eyes followed me no matter where I stood. I chose a bedroom on the second floor, one of the few with furniture not draped in cloth. It had a fireplace, a four-poster bed, and tall windows with velvet curtains. That first night, I built a fire and tried to sleep. The wind outside moaned against the glass, and the floorboards creaked under no weight. I told myself it was just an old house, settling, but I dreamed of whispers, not words, just the hushed rhythm of voices moving in circles, growing louder, until I awoke in darkness. The fire had gone out, but I hadn't noticed the cold, only the sound. It came from down the hallway, soft footsteps, slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The steps paused outside my door. Then came a tap. Not a knock, more like fingers brushing the wood. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a moment, the steps continued down the hall and faded into silence. In the morning, the hallway was empty, but dust on the floor had been disturbed, not footprints, just drag marks, like something had been pulled. I explored the house more that day. It was larger than I'd realized. There were rooms that felt hidden, closets that opened to staircases, and doors that led to other doors. The attic was locked, the key nowhere in sight. I found a library with books that hadn't been touched in decades. I found a piano room with all the keys covered in a thin gray film. Every room had a mirror, and every mirror reflected something slightly off. A figure in the corner, a shadow with no source, a flicker of movement behind me that vanished when I turned. That night, the whispers returned. This time, they came from the walls. I pressed my ear to the plaster and heard them clearly. Dozens of voices, speaking in tones too low to understand, overlapping, weaving through each other. I couldn't tell if they were crying or laughing. I backed away, and the mirror across the room caught my eye. There was someone in it, a woman, pale, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. I turned, but the room was empty. When I looked back, the mirror showed only me. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found a photo album on the dining room table. I hadn't put it there. The cover was cracked leather, the pages yellowed. The photographs inside were of the house, old black and whites, showing it in its younger days. But the people in the photos, they were wrong. Their faces were blurred, distorted, smudged like melted wax. Some had no eyes. Others had too many. One image showed a woman seated on the front porch, her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin that reached to her ears. She was wearing the same dress as the woman in the mirror. I closed the book and left it where I found it. But the next day, it returned to my bedside table. I started hearing music at night. Soft piano played slowly and out of tune. It drifted through the halls, even though I had never opened the piano. Once I followed the sound, candle in hand, down the stairs and into the room. The keys were moving, pressing themselves. The melody was familiar, something from childhood maybe, but when I approached, the keys stopped and the candle went out. In the dark, I heard breathing behind me. I didn't turn. I left the room and locked the door. The nights became longer. Time lost meaning. The clocks all stopped at different hours. I'd light candles and find them extinguished minutes later. I heard footsteps above me when I was in the attic, and below me when I was in the basement. One evening, I found a journal tucked beneath the floorboard in the library. It was my great-aunt's. Her handwriting was frantic, scrawled across pages like she was trying to outrun something. "They come in the mirrors," she wrote. "They remember me. They remember everyone. Who stays too long," another entry. "The house knows. It sees through the walls. It keeps them here." I read every page, each one more desperate than the last. They speak in dreams. They wear our faces. I saw myself in the window last night, but I was still in bed. The attic is the heart. The final entry was, written in trembling script, "It won't let me leave." I tried to leave the next morning. The front door opened, but the world outside had changed. Fog covered everything. The trees were wrong, twisted and tall, their branches like fingers reaching out. I walked down the path, but after a few minutes, I was back at the front gate. I tried again. And again. Each time, the house returned. That night, I dreamed I was walking through endless hallways. Each door opened into another hallway. Behind each door, a mirror. And in each mirror, the woman waited, except her eyes were mine. When I awoke, every mirror in the house had cracked. The whispers now spoke my name. They called from inside the walls, from beneath the floor, from the cracks in the ceiling. They laughed when I covered my ears. They whispered when I screamed. The house no longer creaked. It breathed. Rooms shifted when I wasn't looking. Hallways grew longer. Stairs led down when they used to go up. The library disappeared entirely for 2 days, then returned with books in different languages. The portraits began to change. Slowly, the blurred faces started to resemble mine, and I saw her again, the woman, at the end of the hallway, just standing. All was too far to see clearly, but closer each night. The mirrors showed her more clearly than my own reflection, and each time I looked, her face was more familiar, until it was mine. I write this now by candlelight, though the flame flickers low. The house watches me. I hear it in every creak. I feel it in the cold air that slips beneath the door. I don't know what the house wants, but it remembers, it collects, it keeps. I see them now, those who came before. They appear in the corners of my vision. They smile without lips. They whisper through the glass. Soon I will join them. If you find this, if you read this, leave the house. Burn the letter. Never open the door, because once you're inside, the house remembers you, and it never forgets. They say evil wears many faces, but I have learned that the most dangerous of them all is the one you do not see coming. It is not fire and smoke and horns. It is silence. It is a whisper behind your thoughts, a presence so old, so vast, that it needs no introduction. You simply know, the same way you know not to step too close to a cliff's edge, not because of what's in front of you, but because something inside recoils. My name no longer matters. My past is distant, swallowed by what came after, but once I was a man of certainty. I was a scholar, a seeker of knowledge, a teacher. I taught theology and history at a university built on stone older than the nation itself. I believed in truth, in logic. My life was built on reason, and then came the book. It arrived not through a publisher, not through a library. It was simply placed on my desk, no return address, no explanation, wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax that bore an unfamiliar symbol, like a tree uprooted and burning from the top down. The pages were parchment, the ink dark and metallic. The text was handwritten in a language that, at first, I did not recognize, but somehow began to understand. Not through study, not through translation. The meaning unfolded itself in my mind like something remembered rather than learned. It called itself The Root of the Serpent. The book claimed to be a record of an ancient covenant, one older than any scripture I had studied. It spoke of a presence not cast out of heaven, but existing before the concept of heaven. Not a fallen angel, but a primal intelligence that refused the structure of creation. It spoke of a force not seeking destruction, but dominion through erosion, through persuasion, patience, and presence. Each chapter was a voice. Each voice spoke of an encounter. Some were dreams, some were visions, some were simply thoughts that turned to voices, then commands, then companionship. I told myself it was a hoax, an elaborate fiction, but I kept reading. Each night this text felt warmer in my hands. I no longer needed light to read. The ink shimmered softly in the dark. My dreams began to shift. I stood in great halls carved from stone, where the walls breathed and the sky above was an endless red ocean. A figure waited in each dream, tall, robed, and crowned in antlers and ash. It never spoke. It only waited, and I woke each morning with the taste of smoke in my throat. Soon I stopped teaching. I told the university I was ill. They gave me time. I gave it all to the book. One night a voice began to answer when I read aloud. It came not from the room, but from inside the silence. Not words, but understanding. It answered questions before I could form them. It guided my hand when I wrote notes in the margins. It corrected my errors, then showed me that the errors were not mine. They were planted to test me. I began to feel watched, not by something hostile, not at first, more like observed, the way a chess player watches a board, waiting for me to understand the rules. My apartment changed, not visibly, but the shadows lingered longer than they should. Mirrors no longer reflected my movements. The ticking of the clock slowed when I read. The food I ate lost all taste, and I began to notice a symbol scratched into wood, drawn in frost, forming in the dust on my windowsill. The same tree uprooted, burning. I started hearing the whisper when I wasn't reading. It said simple things, nothing terrifying, nothing overt. Are you awake? Do you understand yet? Shall I show you more? And then came the night. I said yes. I don't know if I said it aloud. But I felt the agreement settle over me like a shroud, and everything changed. The book turned to ash in my hands, but the words stayed in my mind. I began to write. Not in my own language, not even in the one from the book, a deeper tongue, older, without vowels. My hands bled ink, my eyes wept smoke, and I was not afraid, not then, because with each line I wrote, the truth became clearer. He was not waiting to be summoned. He had never left. He was patient. He was within. He did not need fire to conquer. He needed only belief. That was the true horror. Not that he existed, but that he never had to prove himself. That our minds already knew him. That we had always known. He is the seed in doubt. He is the hunger behind ambition. He is the comfort in isolation. He is the answer when nothing else fits. And when I tried to stop, when I tried to shut my eyes and scream him away, the world blurred. I left my apartment. I walked streets that were too silent. People passed me without faces. The sun above gave no warmth. I passed churches where the crosses had split, turned downward, or been replaced by the tree. Everywhere I looked, the tree, I returned home. But it was no longer home. He waited there, not with claws, not with horns, not with teeth. He sat in the chair across from mine, wearing my face, and smiling with a patience that stretched across centuries. He spoke at last, and the voice was mine, now. You see, I don't know how long it's been. Time is unmoored here. Days pass like dreams. Nights pass like molasses. I still write, but the words are not mine. I transcribe. I am the voice now, as others were before me. You have read this far. That is not an accident. He does not choose randomly. You feel it, don't you? The question forming, the shape of something ancient moving behind your thoughts. He does not demand worship, only acknowledgement, only recognition, only understanding. And once you understand, he speaks, sometimes when the wind is still and your room is silent, when the shadows stretch longer than they should, when the mirror no longer catches your reflection in time. That's when he is nearest, and if you ask to know more, he will answer. He always answers. I do not remember the exact moment it began, only that there was a change, and that the change came quietly, like a draft beneath a closed door, cold and unnoticed until it had already filled the room. It started with small things, my name spoken, when I was alone, a reflection in the window that lingered a moment longer than it should have, an unfamiliar melody humming from the walls of my apartment as I lay half asleep. I chalked it up to stress, too many deadlines, too many sleepless nights. But even then, something inside me knew that was not the truth. The building I lived in was old and quiet in the way only forgotten places are. It had once been a hotel, they said, long before it was turned into apartments. My unit was on the top floor, overlooking the city like a birdcage hung too high for any song to reach. It was small, narrow, with windows that groaned at night and pipes that whispered in the walls. I had grown used to the sounds, but this was different. It was the sound of breathing, not mine. The first time I noticed it, I was brushing my teeth. The mirror fogged from the heat of the water, and behind the misted glass I saw a shadow move, slow and deliberate. I turned, but the room was empty. Still I could hear it, measured, heavy breaths, as though someone were standing just behind me, waiting. I stood there, toothbrush in hand, heart pounding, until the sound stopped. I didn't sleep well. That night I began locking the bathroom door even when I was alone. It didn't help. Over the following weeks, things escalated. I would wake to find the light on, though I was certain I had turned it off. I'd return home to find the window open, the air inside bitter with cold. Sometimes there were footprints on the kitchen floor, bare, damp, and facing toward me. Always toward me. But it wasn't until the dreams began that I truly started to fear. In the dreams, I was walking through corridors I had never seen, but somehow recognized. The walls were covered in dark red velvet, and the air smelled like burnt paper and salt. I walked barefoot, and the floor was warm. At the end of the corridor, there was always a door, always locked, but I could hear something behind it, something whispering my name. At first I tried not to remember the dreams, but they clung to me each night, darker, deeper. The voice behind the door grew louder, not angry, not even urgent, but patient, calm, persuasive. And familiar? It sounded like me. One night I dreamed I opened the door. There was a room beyond, circular, windowless. The walls covered in symbols I did not understand, but could feel pulsing beneath my skin. In the center of the room stood S. Man, he was not monstrous. That was the worst part. He looked ordinary, pale skin, dark hair, a face that was both young and ancient, impossible to place. He wore a suit, neat and timeless, as though he had never stepped outside the room, yet never aged. He did not smile, but neither did he threaten. He only raised his hand and said, "Welcome back." I woke with blood on my palms, not mine. I tried to shake it. I stopped sleeping. I stopped leaving the apartment. The outside world felt unreal, like a stage built for a play I had long since forgotten. The few times I ventured out, people stared at me too long. They didn't smile. They didn't blink. Once, a woman passed me on the street, paused, and whispered, "He's nearly through, you know." Then she kept walking. I began to see him in mirrors. Was always just behind me, never moving, but growing clearer each time. At first, he was only a shadow, then a figure, then a face. My face, but wrong. The smile too wide, the eyes too deep, and when I turned to look, the room was always empty. I stopped looking in mirrors, stopped listening to music. The radio only played static now. Sometimes, amid the static, I could hear him humming. That same song from the beginning, the one the walls sang when I couldn't sleep. I knew the melody now. I knew every note. I began to write, pages upon pages. Words I didn't recognize, but which poured from me like confession. I don't know what I wrote. I tried to read it once, but the letters shifted beneath my eyes. One sentence stood out, repeated over and over in different places. "You already let him in." I started to remember things, not memories, not mine, but flashes of other lives, a fire in a church, a man laughing as the bells fell, a child speaking in tongues not known by any living soul. I saw cities burning. I saw kings kneeling. I saw shadows wearing the skins of priests and mothers and brothers, and I knew him, not by name but by presence. He had no need for horns or fire. His gift was much simpler. Certainty. He showed you what you wanted to see. He gave you what you thought was truth. He whispered it until it echoed louder than your own thoughts, and then, when you no longer knew which voice was yours, he smiled. That is his nature. Not chaos, not destruction. Conviction. I tried to pray, but the words would not come, my mouth would not form them. Each time I tried, I saw his eyes in my mind, watching, waiting. He wasn't invading, he was waiting to be acknowledged. One night I returned to the dream room. This time I did not walk in. I stood in the threshold, watching him. He looked up, as though he had known I was there all along. "You are not ready," he said, "but you will be." The next day, the windows were gone. The apartment was sealed in darkness, and no matter how many lights I turned on, the shadows swallowed everything. My reflection never returned. My voice echoed in ways it shouldn't, sometimes delayed, sometimes not at all. And when I listened carefully, I could hear his breathing again, except now it came from inside me. I have stopped marking the days. I no longer remember how long it's been. The clocks do not tick. The world outside has vanished, or perhaps I have. Either way, there is only this place now, and him. He does not demand anything. He does not threaten. He waits. He is patience itself. Every time I think I am alone, he reminds me otherwise, not with words, but with presence. I have come to understand that he is not a visitor. He is a return. The devil is not something that comes for you. He is something that wakes in you, slowly, patiently, until you forget you were ever anything else. And when the last light goes out, when the last name fades, when the last thought you know is yours disappears, he is what remains. And he smiles because you never closed the door. You only looked away. It was never supposed to be permanent, just a temporary place while I searched for something better. That's how the house introduced itself to me, quiet, tucked at the edge of a faded cul-de-sac where even the street lamps seemed tired of burning. The listing described it as old, but full of character, that familiar real estate euphemism that means creaking floors and unpredictable wiring. I wasn't looking for charm. I was looking for cheap, and this house offered that in abundance. It was a 2-story structure, sagging slightly to one side, with a porch that leaned out as though reaching for help. The windows were tall and thin, with glass that distorted the light into strange, murky shadows. Inside, it smelled of wood that had been wet for too long, and something else I couldn't name. A dry, bitter smell, like dust that had forgotten the sun. The rooms were too quiet. Even empty houses usually held some noise, pipes shifting, walls contracting, floorboards settling. But here, the silence pressed against my ears like cotton soaked in static. I thought maybe it was insulation, or the way the place had been sealed up for so long. The first few nights passed without incident. Just the usual strangeness of adjusting to a new space. Light switches that didn't connect to anything, drafts that moved through closed doors, hallways that seemed a little longer in the dark than during the day. That was the thing. I began to notice how the dimensions didn't hold. I'd measure a wall in the morning and get a different result than in the evening. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that I was just tired or misremembering. But I started taking pictures with my phone, measuring tapes in view. The walls moved, subtly, quietly. But they moved. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settle. Maybe it was humidity, expansion, contraction, natural shifts, but I could feel the difference. I began keeping a journal. Every morning I would record where. Each door was how many steps it took to reach the kitchen from the stairs, the angle of the window light, and every night something had changed. One evening, I found a hallway that hadn't been there before. I stood at the edge of it, blinking into the dim stretch of wallpapered walls and faded carpet. It wasn't wide, maybe 3 feet across, and it sloped slightly downward. It was wrong, not in the sense of being broken or unsafe, but fundamentally wrong. Like a thought you're not supposed to think, or a word that feels cursed in your mouth. I didn't go down it. Not that night. Instead, I closed the door. It was behind. A door that, up to that point, had only ever revealed a shallow closet, and placed a chair in front of it. The next morning, the chair was gone, not moved, gone. The door stood ajar, the hallway beyond it darker than I remembered. I began hearing sounds then, not loud, not dramatic, just movements, a faint shuffle, a dragging sigh, breathing that didn't belong to me, and sometimes a tapping from within the walls, as though someone were walking with their fingers pressed against the other side of the plaster. The hallway was longer the next time I looked. I started to dream of rooms I had never entered. Rooms with furniture covered in white sheets, their shapes unfamiliar. Rooms with clocks that ticked backward and mirrors that showed different reflections each time I passed. Sometimes I would wake standing in a hallway, my hand pressed against a wall that pulsed with heat. The back rooms began appearing gradually. A pantry behind the fridge, a staircase under the floorboards, a hatch in the ceiling of the laundry room that led to a crawl space bigger than the house should allow. I mapped them all obsessively. Sketches, measurements, photos. But they never stayed the same. Corridors stretched. Doors led to different places depending on the time of day. Eventually, I found the room. The center. It was hidden behind a thin sliver of a door at the very back of one of the newly formed hallways. A door. I could only see from certain angles. It had no knob, only a keyhole that wept cold air. I stared into it for minutes at a time, and I swear I could hear something whispering on the other side. Not words, just intent. The room did not want to be found, and yet it waited. Over time, the house became a maze. Some days I couldn't find the front door. Other days, windows opened onto blank walls. I left notes for myself, arrows drawn in chalk, strings tied around door handles. They would be gone the next morning, or moved to different places. Sometimes they would be replaced with messages I didn't write. They knew, they watched. Not with malice, but with attention. That was somehow worse. It's one thing to be hunted. It's another to be studied. I stopped leaving, not out of fear, but because I no longer trusted the outside to exist as it once had. The more time I spent in the house, the less real the world outside became. Faces in photos blurred. Names in my contacts list vanished. The internet stopped working, not all at once, but piece by piece. Websites would refuse to load. Then pages became empty. Then the screen went black entirely. It was around then that I began seeing figures in the walls, only impressions at first. Shapes behind the wallpaper, hands pressed against it like a sheet of ice. Sometimes eyes wide and patient, waiting for me to acknowledge them. One night I followed the hallway to the keyhole door again. This time it was open. Inside, the room was circular, lined with bookshelves that stretched up beyond sight. The air was still, thick with the scent of old paper and something metallic. In the center stood a chair. Facing away from me, I knew without question that if I walked around that chair, everything would change. I walked forward, slow. Each step felt longer than the last, as though the space bent around me, reluctant to let me reach it. When I finally rounded the chair, it was empty, but not unoccupied. The air around it shimmered with something unseen, like the aftermath of a scream, too, old to be heard. I felt a weight pressed down on my shoulders. Not pain, not threat, expectation. The room was not a trap, it was a seed, and I had watered it. Since that night, the house has stopped pretending. It no longer hides its shifts. Rooms change as I walk through them. The floor bends beneath my feet. The ceiling breathes. There is no longer a difference between night and day. The house does not abide by such rules. Time is thin here, reality thinner. I am not alone. There are others in the walls, not alive, not dead, just present. Echoes maybe, remnants. I see them sometimes, staring from corners that weren't there, seconds before. They never move. But they are always closer the next time I look. The back rooms have no end. They loop, spiral, collapse into each other. I've walked for hours only to return to the same spot from a different angle. And yet they never repeat exactly. Something always changes. A light bulb missing, a picture frame crooked, a sound playing on a loop that doesn't exist anywhere else in the house. I understand now. The house is not haunted. It is the haunting. It does not need ghosts. It remembers. And remembering is enough. It doesn't want me gone. It wants me to stay, because that is how it grows. It doesn't feed on fear. It feeds on recognition. Each moment I spend here, each breath I take within its walls, strengthens it. I am becoming part of it. My thoughts echo through the wood. My memories soak into the wallpaper, and I don't fight it anymore. I don't look for the exit. I don't call for help, because the house is no longer something I live in. It is something I am, and the back rooms are still growing. It began with a listing, a plain house, white wood siding, peeling in some spots, shuttered windows that looked like they hadn't opened in years. The price was absurdly low, almost suspicious, yet it passed all inspections, structurally sound. Foundations stable, no record of damage, just old, unloved. They called it an estate sale. The previous owner had passed away under vague circumstances, no surviving family. The bank wanted it off their hands. I wanted solitude. It was a perfect match. I signed the papers without hesitation, moved in with nothing but a suitcase, a mattress, and a box of books I never quite opened. The first night was uneventful, just quiet, the sort of silence that presses against your chest when you lie awake. At 2 a.m., when the world has tucked itself into sleep and even the insects refuse to speak, I thought it was peace. On the second night, I noticed the hallway was longer, not much, maybe an extra foot or two, enough that I noticed the floor creaked, in a place it hadn't before. I chalked it up to fatigue, a long day, a strange new place. Brains play tricks when they want to, but the hallway never shrank back. Over the next week, small changes bloomed. The kitchen window no longer lined up with the garden. The stairs creaked in a new pattern. I began to feel watched, though I never saw anyone. The feeling was subtle at first, like the weight of a memory that won't leave your shoulders. But then it thickened, slow and deliberate, until I could barely stand in certain rooms without feeling the air press against me. I started closing doors and locking them, not out of fear, exactly, more out of caution, as if by sealing certain rooms off, I could keep the oddness contained. But the house had other plans. Doors I locked would be ajar in the morning. Windows I nailed shut would open during the night. Sometimes I'd wake to find drawers pulled open. Furniture moved a few inches. The lights would flicker, never quite turning off, just pulsing dimly, like a breath held too long. Then came the back rooms. It started when I dropped a pen in the study. It rolled beneath the bookshelf. When I knelt to retrieve it, my hand brushed something cold, a metal hinge where none should be. I pushed against the baseboard, and the wall clicked open, revealing a narrow, descending staircase behind it. The air that rushed out was still and thick, untouched for years. I should have turned away. I should have sealed it up. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The stairs creaked beneath my weight. Each step echoed too long, as if the sound were traveling farther than it should. At the bottom, I found a corridor that stretched into blackness. The flashlight barely pierced it. Walls lined with faded wallpaper curled like old skin. The carpet was damp. The smell was one of forgotten rot, wood, mildew, and something too sweet. I walked for what felt like hours. The hallway twisted, split, looped back on itself. I marked my path with chalk, but the marks disappeared when I circled back. Eventually, I found a room. It was empty, just 4 walls and a mirror that hung too high to use. But the moment I stepped inside, the door closed behind me, and it was gone. Not shut, gone. A blank wall in its place. I ran my hands along the surface, felt the cold smoothness of stone where wood should be. I stood there in the silence. Something moved behind the mirror. It didn't show a reflection, just darkness. A thick, oily black that shimmered like the surface of water. I watched as a hand pressed against it from the inside. Not mine, not human. Fingers too long, too thin, with too many joints. I backed away, and the wall returned. I never found the stairs again. I looked for days, tore through floorboards, peeled back wallpaper, mapped every inch of the house, but the entrance was gone. And in its place were other doors. Doors that hadn't been there before, some narrow, barely wide enough to slip through, others tall and arched, with knobs made of bone or rusted metal. Each one led to somewhere different. Some opened to closets that shrank as I stepped in. Others opened to hallways that stretched into the impossible. All was dim, all was quiet. One opened to a library with books that had no writing, only shifting images of people I didn't know, people who stared at me with eyes full of accusation. The house was alive. It didn't creak. It whispered. Sometimes I'd hear it in the vents. Other times through the floor, a low guttural hum that rose to words I almost understood. Not a language, not exactly, just sounds that burrowed beneath my thoughts. I stopped sleeping. The back rooms became bolder. I'd open the bathroom door and find the hallway from the basement. I'd leave my bedroom and walk into a windowless room filled with old mannequins. their faces scraped smooth, their hands held out as if begging for something I couldn't give. Time became strange. Days stretched. Nights bled into each other. My phone stopped working. My watch spun backward. Sometimes I'd hear knocking, 3 short taps, always from inside the walls. When I knocked back, the house knocked again, but never in the same rhythm. One night, I found a second front door. It was on the 3rd floor, where no door should be. It opened to another version of my street. Same houses, same trees, but wrong. The colors were off, too pale, too quiet. The sky had no sun, no clouds, just a gray void pulsing slightly. I stepped outside and instantly felt something shift. Beneath my feet, like the ground was watching. I didn't walk far. I turned back and found the door had vanished. I began hearing footsteps above my bed at night. There was no attic. I nailed the bedroom door shut, moved a dresser in front of it, but in the morning it was open, and written on the walls, over and over was one sentence: stay in the light. I don't remember writing it. There was no light left. The bulbs dimmed until they flickered and died. The window showed only the gray sky, no matter the hour. I lit candles, but the flame would shrink when I held it to certain corners. It's like the darkness had mass, like it wanted to spread. The house showed me things, rooms I'd never seen before, filled with old photographs. Some were of me, but taken from angles that suggested I wasn't alone. Pictures of me sleeping, sitting, staring out windows I didn't remember approaching. In one photo, I was staring into a mirror, but my reflection looked away. I tried to leave, packed a bag, walked out the front door. I arrived back inside. No matter how far I walked, I always returned to the house. It was no longer a structure. It was a loop, a trap. A mouth that didn't chew, only swallowed and waited. Then the house began to rearrange while I was watching. Walls moved. Doors slammed shut behind me. Furniture shifted when I blinked. I began to lose track of which room was which. Sometimes the kitchen would appear on the 2nd floor. Other times the bathroom would stretch on endlessly, the tiles repeating like a pattern gone mad. I started seeing people, not real, not fully, flickers. A woman in black walking past the end of a hallway, a child crouching in the corner of the ceiling, a man with no face standing just outside the window, even on the 3rd floor. They never moved while I watched, but I could feel them moving when I turned away. The back rooms multiplied. I could open the same door 5 times in a row and find 5 different places. Sometimes they were rooms I knew, twisted and wrong. Other times they were places I couldn't comprehend. Voids with stairs that climbed nowhere, halls made entirely of mirrors, floors that pulsed like flesh. One room was filled with clocks, all ticking at different speeds, none of them real. Their hands spun erratically, and when I stepped inside, I lost time. Minutes, hours, maybe days. I emerged and found a beard I hadn't grown, a scar on my hand I didn't remember earning. I am still here. The house no longer lets me sleep. It no longer lets me forget. Sometimes I find rooms filled with writing, my writing, journals I've never kept, pages pinned to walls, full of my voice, but describing events I haven't lived yet, things I will do, things the house will show me, things I will become. I think the house is feeding, not on flesh, on awareness. The more I understand it, the deeper I fall. Each realization opens a new hallway. Each question unlocks another door. There is no end. There is only the house and its rooms, and me, and all the versions of me I haven't met yet. Somewhere in the back rooms, I saw a door with my name on it. I haven't opened it, but I know I will. It started with a laugh, not one of joy. It was brittle, high-pitched, like glass cracking under pressure. I heard it at night just outside my window. I live on the 2nd floor. The first time I brushed it off as a dream. The mind plays tricks, especially when you're alone. I'd moved to this old, overgrown town for peace and distance. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The house creaked like an old man's bones. The floor groaned beneath my steps, and the wind often howled through the trees. I told myself the laugh was the wind, the echo of a coyote, a figment, until I saw the balloons, bright red ones, one tied to my mailbox, one to the back gate, one floating just beneath my bedroom window, held in place by some unseen string. They were always there in the morning, never at night, never during the day. Just when I woke like gifts waiting for me. I popped them at first, laughed nervously, thinking it was some bizarre prank. But they returned. 2 the next morning, then 3, then 5. I stopped popping them. I began ignoring them, and yet they began appearing inside, on my kitchen table, tied to the bathroom faucet. One floated above my pillow when I woke with a start from a nightmare I couldn't remember. They were never loud, never messy, just there, watching somehow. That laugh, faint and cracked, followed the balloons. Some nights it came from beneath the floorboards, other nights from the attic. Once I heard it in the hallway, as if someone was standing just out of sight, waiting. It escalated. The TV flicked on by itself one night, just static. But hidden in the grain of white noise was something else, flickers of color. Faces, painted. Faces, pale, with wide grins and frozen eyes. I unplugged the TV, but the image stayed. Grinning, twitching. I hurled the set outside. The power flickered in response. One night I woke to the sound of music. Slow, off-key carnival music playing faintly from somewhere in the house. I followed it, barefoot, the cold floor numbing. My steps. It led to the basement door, which hung open, breathing stale air. I hadn't opened it. I stood at the top of the stairs. The music was louder now, bouncing off the stone walls. I called out, but my voice sounded hollow, like it didn't belong to me. I descended slowly, each step groaning louder than the last. At the bottom, the music stopped. In the far corner, hunched beneath the single, flickering light bulb, was a clown. Its costume was faded, the red pom-poms on its chest stained. Its painted face smiled, but its eyes were empty, staring straight ahead, unmoving. A cardboard sign hung around its neck, handwritten in crude red letters. Not alone. I ran, tripped, crawled up the stairs, slammed the door shut behind me, and locked it. The music didn't resume, but I heard a soft knock on the other side of the door. Once, then again, then 3 times, slowly. I didn't open it. I never opened it again. The next day the clown was gone, but the sign remained, hanging from a chair in the kitchen. I threw it in the fireplace. It didn't burn. That night I saw more of them, not just one, dozens. Outside, circling the house, their painted smiles glowing faintly in the moonlight. Some had hair like tangled straw. Others had grotesquely large shoes that scraped across the gravel as they moved. None of them blinked. None of them spoke. They just stared, encircling me in silence. I called the police. No one answered, not even a ring. I tried to drive away the next morning. My car had been filled with balloons, hundreds of them, crammed into every inch of space. When I opened the door, they spilled out, rolling across the ground in slow, lazy movements. The smell of grease paint and rotting sugar filled the air. I stopped sleeping. At night, I heard footsteps in the walls, laughter under the bed. Once I woke to a clown sitting at the foot of the bed, rocking slowly. It held nothing, did nothing, just rocked, grinning into the dark. I blinked, and it was gone. But the rocking chair kept moving. They began coming inside. One by one, through mirrors, closets, doors, I locked and bolted. I would turn and see one standing in the hall, then 2 in the living room, then 5 crowding the kitchen. They never moved when I watched. Only when I blinked or turned away or gasped, they appeared closer, closer, closer. I boarded up the house. I sealed every entrance. I shut off every light. They didn't need doors. They began appearing in the corners, bent over, twitching as if barely able to hold still. Some whispered nonsense. Others laughed in short bursts, like hiccups of madness. One stared at me for 3 hours, then vanished when I finally screamed. I stopped eating. The food tasted like sawdust, the water like melted sugar. My reflection became someone else, painted, lips, pale skin, hair beginning to curl unnaturally red. I tried cutting the mirrors, breaking them, but they still showed the clowns. They began mimicking me. I would speak and hear my voice echo, just slightly wrong. I would walk and hear double footsteps. I would cry and hear it laughed back at me. And then, one night, I found them standing in rows, in the basement, in the attic, in the closet. Dozens, hundreds, lined up, shoulder to shoulder, faces twitching with laughter they didn't release. They were waiting. I understood then. I wasn't being haunted. I was being replaced. Each laugh stole something, a memory, a piece of my voice. The way I stood, the way I looked at the world. The house no longer smelled like me. My clothes no longer fit. My skin began to itch with the urge to smile. My hands shook when they weren't juggling. The house became their stage, and I became their show. The last time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw the lead clown, painted grin stretched wide, eyes black with pinpricks of color that spun slowly, and he winked, not in malice, but in welcome. Now I sit in the dark. I can't tell which ones are real anymore. They walk with my voice. They wear my face. I hear them whisper to each other, practicing, rehearsing, preparing. They're coming for the world outside. And when they do, they'll be laughing. I first noticed the painted face in the grocery store aisle. I was reaching for a can of tomatoes when the aisle behind me curved, and there he was, half hidden by the end cap display, his bright red smile too wide, the dark triangles over his eyes melting into something hungry. He wore the peel-away costume of a budget birthday clown, billowing polka-dot pants, a stained vest, a floppy hat perched at an odd angle. The overhead lights hit his white makeup, so it gleamed like bone. For a moment he stood perfectly still, exactly one aisle over, watching me. Then he vanished around the corner. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I'd caught a glimpse of a mannequin in the toy section, or a promotional ad on one of those little screen inserts at the end of the shelf. My senses were frayed from weeks of too much work and too little sleep. I was overdue for a weekend off. But when I reached down for the tomatoes again, I saw fingerprints in the dust on the end cap. 2 small, smeared arcs of red, like someone had tapped the shelf with gloved fingertips. At home, I couldn't shake the memory. I tried to distract myself by cooking, chopping herbs, simmering garlic, but the knife trembled in my hand. Once I thought I heard fake laughter drifting in through the living room vent, a high, tinny giggle, like plastic wheels spinning on. An old toy. I pressed my ear to the vent, but there was only the hum of the furnace. That night, I dreamed of him. I was on a carousel, painted horses mounted on poles, frozen in mid-rear, with that grin filling the center mirror. He sat behind me, bones cracking in a soft, wet rhythm, and his laughter echoed off the stripes of the tent canopy overhead. I tried to turn, to scream, but the clown's hand clamped over my mouth. I jerked awake, heart pounding, safe in my own bed, until I felt something soft brush my ankle. I threw back the covers and found a single satin glove lying atop the sheet, palm up, fingertips stained red. I hurled the glove across the room. It landed at the foot of my closet, a solitary white hand in a pile of clothes. I stumbled to the door and flipped on every light. The glove lay empty. I stared at it until dawn, every nerve alive with fear. In the morning, I wrapped the glove in a plastic bag and tossed it into the dumpster behind the building. The smell of stale trash hit me. Coffee grounds, old takeout boxes, a faint tang of something sulfuric I couldn't name. I turned to leave, and something caught my eye. a single red balloon tied to the edge of the dumpster with a length of curling ribbon. No knot, just looped around the metal grate. It bobbed lazily. The helium barely enough to lift it. I stared until the ribbon unfurled, the balloon floating up and vanishing among the trees. I didn't see the clown again for days. I began to relax, almost believed none of it was real. Then I found the photos. They were tucked under my doormat in a small stack, all the same size, glossy Polaroids. Each one showed my apartment, the living room sofa, the kitchen countertop, the bathroom sink, shot from odd angles as though someone had walked through my walls with a hidden camera. The last photo was taken in my bedroom, showing the foot of the bed, a dark shape crouched there, its head turned toward the camera, bearing the same painted grin and black-rimmed eyes. I dropped the photos on the floor and scrambled back, as though a live clown might spring out at me. I called my friend Mara, a forensic photographer. I asked her to come over under the pretext of needing help with a gallery show. When she arrived, I led her into the living room and dropped the photos on the coffee table. She picked one up, her brow furrowing. "These are good," she said. "Very high resolution." She turned it over. No timestamp, no notes. "Where'd you get these?" "I found them on my doorstep. I tried to keep my voice steady. Last night." Mara studied my face. Then she said, "Let's check the metadata." We hauled out my laptop and plugged in the Polaroid scanner she carried in her satchel. I watched as she ran software that usually uncovers camera details, shutter speed, aperture, GPS coordinates. She frowned. "There's nothing," she said. Finally, no camera signature, no maker notes. It's as if someone printed these directly from their mind. Her words felt cold and clever and useless. I left her house with the originals crumpled in my pocket, and as I walked to my car, I felt a ripple behind me. Click, click, like tap-dancing shoes on the pavement. I dared not look back. Over the next week, the clown's gifts multiplied. A deflated, bouncy ball of a nose left on my doorstep, a half-melted birthday candle jammed into the door's peephole, a cassette tape wedged under the mail slot, labeled in scrawled red ink, "Smile." When I played it, there was only static, then a woman's soft voice giggling, followed by the clown's deep baritone. We're all smiles together. I barricaded my door with a chair and a heavy suitcase. I ripped the peephole out and stapled cardboard over the hole. Sleep became a dreamless blackness, a void I sometimes leapt for in exhaustion. One evening I found an invitation slipped under the door, a single sheet of folded cardstock, embossed in crimson. "You're invited." I flipped it open. No event name, no date, only an address. 322 Pine Street. The invitation crackled in my hand, nearly wet with something that smelled like cotton candy and rust. Pine Street was 2 miles away, in a neighborhood of boarded-up Victorian homes. Most houses were dark, but one stood lit, the fading glow of party lights through the windows, a glittering banner above the porch reading, "Welcome." The lawn was strewn with dirty streamers and chunks of half-eaten cake. I crept up the rotting steps. Music drifted out, calliope, laughter, the clink of glass. Inside, the house was empty. Streamers drooped from the ceiling. Chairs sat in circles, backs turned outward, as though someone had arranged a children's party and then abandoned it. On each seat was a paper bag. I lifted one. Inside lay a bright red nose, a polka-dot bow tie, and a small bag of confetti. On the table in the center of the circle stood a single birthday cake, lit by a motion-sensing candle that ignited the moment I stepped closer. The wax dripped like tears onto the frosting. I backed away, tripped, and went sprawling across the floor. The candle flickered and died. The lights went out, and all the chairs turned simultaneously to face me. Empty seats, but in each backrest. I thought I saw the shape of the clown's grin carved into the wood. In the sudden darkness, I heard a whisper, "Join us." I scrambled to my feet and tore toward the front door. It was locked. My hands fumbled at the knob. Behind me, a soft tap, 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 like long fingers drumming on the table. I lunged, swinging my shoulder into the door. It lurched, then opened. I bolted into the night, racing down Pine Street, never looking back until the party lights were gone from view. My heart thundered in my chest. When I reached my car, I collapsed against the hood and shook until my arms couldn't hold me upright. I called Mara. She answered on the first ring, urgent. "I thought you said you were safe," she'd said. "I'm leaving," I told her, "tonight." I raced home, threw a few things in a bag, and drove south through the empty streets. I didn't stop until I found a motel with a flickering neon sign reading "Vacancy." The clerk gave me a key with no questions asked. I fumbled it open and stepped into the room, locking the deadbolt behind me. The room smelled of bleach and old cigarettes. I turned on every light. I taped the door frame with strips of duct tape. I piled the dresser against the door. Then I waited. Midnight passed. I heard nothing. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, half expecting a red balloon to tap at the window, or the clown's face pressed against the glass. But the night remained silent. I woke just before dawn and packed my bag again, planning to drive on. I unstrapped the umbrella from the back seat and kept it by my side, a makeshift weapon. As I climbed into the car, I heard a thump on the window. My breath froze. I turned, and there he was, standing outside my door, costume smudged with earth, his painted grin splitting his face. He held 2 balloons, one red, one black, tied to a bundle of ribbon. He tapped on the glass. I leapt out of the car, slammed the door, and fumbled for the lock. The knob turned, locked. He raised a hand in the classic clown wave, slow, deliberate, and mouthed one word, "Soon." I ripped the keys from the ignition and drove away before the engine even stalled. On the interstate, I drove until the sun rose high and the world grew warm. I stopped for gas, for food, for coffee, but every time I stepped from the car, I felt those oversized shoes at the edge of my vision, heard that whisper of laughter mingled with static. Now I'm in a motel 3 states away, bleeding the gasoline tank dry. The car smells of confetti and fear. My phone is dead, no bars anywhere. I sit in this room under fluorescent lights, refusing to close my eyes. I clutch the umbrella, knuckles white, waiting for a soft knock on the door, a single red-nosed tube. Roll across the threshold, a Polaroid to appear on the pillow beside me, because I know he's coming. I know he's been here all along, standing just behind me with that grin too wide, those eyes hollow and bright. He's patient. He never tires. And when he arrives, he will whisper once more, "Let's all." I moved into the old Victorian house on Hawthorne Street, hoping the change of scenery would quiet the rough edges of my mind. I had left my small apartment in the city after the 3rd sleepless night in a row, during which I was certain, absolutely certain, that something scratched at my bedroom door, trying to get in. In the morning light there was no damage, no sign of forced entry, only the faint impression of nails on the wood, as if someone had leaned close and tapped with their fingertips. My landlord offered to fix the door. I declined. I needed distance, a fortress of bricks and windows to keep thought, any thought, at bay. The Hawthorne house was exactly what I wanted. isolated on a gentle hill surrounded by an overgrown garden and backed by a stand of pines. The previous owner had been an antiquarian who collected dusty curiosities and filled every room with jars of herbs, stacks of leather-bound books, and ancient crucifixes carved from black wood. I found his journal on an oak shelf in the library, entries in a slender hand describing a relentless torment, whispers in the solitude, fleeting shadows at the corner of vision, the sensation of fingernails across the skin in the dead of night. He wrote of demons. He wrote of bargains. He wrote of a presence that grew stronger the more he tried to understand it. His final entry was a single line scrawled in crimson ink. "It is inside me now." I closed the journal and placed it on the desk. I did not read further. The first night in my new room, I slept deeper than I had for months. I dreamed of running through sunlit fields, of laughter carried on the breeze. When I awoke, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, and the house was peaceful. I believed I was safe. It began on the second night. I woke to a soft chanting, low and rhythmic, coming from somewhere in the walls. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The words were indistinct but urgent, as though a prayer twisted by pain. I slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the corridor to the basement door. The chanting stopped. In the pale lamplight, the door stood closed, its iron latch unbroken. I told myself it was the wind in the pipes, the floorboards settling. I clambered back to bed and waited for sleep, but my thoughts roiled like a storm-tossed sea. I stared into the darkness until dawn. Over the next days, the house revealed more secrets. I found scorch marks on the mantelpiece in the parlor, tiny circles where candles had burned unnaturally, black rings that resisted cleaning. Beneath a loose floorboard in the attic was carved a pentagram, rough-hewn and stained, the wood still. Warm to the touch, though, I must have disturbed it hours earlier. I walled it over with plaster, intent on forgetting it. But at night I dreamed of the symbol bleeding into the walls, spreading like a stain that could never be erased. One evening I visited the local historical society in town. The librarian, a thin woman with steely hair, showed me a photograph. From the 1920s, the house in its prime, flowers blooming on the porch, children playing on the lawn. Behind them, standing in a cluster, were the previous owners, pale-faced, unsmiling, eyes bright with something other than amusement. One man wore a ring with a black stone. I recognized the symbol engraved on it. The same pentagram. That. Family, the librarian said softly. They were said to dabble in things best left alone. Witchcraft, seances, rituals in the forest at night. She leaned in. They vanished one by one. No one ever found their bodies. I felt a prickle of unease. Back home, I locked every door and lit every lamp before dark. I slept with a crucifix in one hand and a small vial of salt in the other. It started with a mirror. I found it in the master bedroom, a tall, gilded frame holding glass so old it seemed to ripple like water when I peered at my reflection. That night I woke thirsty and reached for my water glass. In the mirror I saw someone else behind me, a man, tall and thin, skin pale as ash, wearing the same ring from the photograph. His eyes were black pits. I leapt around, torch in hand. The room was empty. I stared at the mirror until my reflection swam back. After that, I never looked into a reflective surface without dread. I covered the bathroom mirror with an old quilt, draped a sheet over the mantelpiece mirror, and refused to check my reflection in any window. The chanting resumed. Each night it grew louder, more urgent, weaving through the walls like a serpent. I could feel it vibrating through the floors, rattling picture frames and stirring the dust. I chased the sound to the basement door again, bracing myself against it. This time it came from below. When I pried it open, the stairs led into blackness. I grabbed my lantern and walked down. The basement was enormous, with stone walls slick from damp. Old casks lined one side. The pungent smell of must and rot hung heavy. I followed the contour of the room until I found an alcove. Inside was a stone altar, carved with the pentagram, stained deep red. In the circle's center was a shallow basin filled with murky water. On the altar lay a book bound in human skin, its pages inscribed with arcane symbols. My breath caught. I knew then that something unwholesome dwelled here, a force that had grown over decades, feeding on fear, feeding on what? I could not name it. My mind recoiled, but I moved forward anyway, drawn by a terrible fascination. I reached to touch the book. The moment my fingers brushed the skin cover, a crack split the air, like thunder in a bottle, and a voice roared in my head, primal, hungry. Free me! I stumbled back, lantern clattering, and fled up the stairs. Behind me, the altar cracked, stone shattering, the basin's water sloshing. I slammed the door and sealed it with chains. For days afterward, the house was still. The chanting stopped. The shadows retreated into corners. I dared to hope that I had closed the door on something unspeakable. Then the whispering began. At first it was distant, like voices in a crowded room. I heard it in the attic, in the hallway, in the far corner of the kitchen, indistinct murmurs, children singing lullabies in languages I could not understand. Each night I followed the voices, climbing the narrow ladder to the attic, pressing my ear to the boards. When I broke through the flimsy ceiling seal, all I found was old trunks and moth-eaten rugs, nothing more. One night I crept downstairs, in the dark, and found footsteps on the hardwood floor, small, bare footprints leading toward my study. They ended at the desk, where the journal from the library lay open. Its pages were filled with new entries in a hand not my own, describing rituals I had never heard of, names I could not pronounce. Torn diagrams showed how to open a gateway, how to bind a spirit. I stared at the writing until the room spun. Didn't sleep at all that night. Dawn found me huddled on the study floor, eyes blistered from tears. I knew I had to leave. I packed my bags, dragged them from room to room, and loaded the car. I would drive to the coast, find a room by the Arc, see and breathe salt air until the world felt real again. As I pulled out of the gravel driveway, I glanced back at the house. In the attic window, orange light glowed. No lamps were on. A figure stood there, tall, thin, ring-black and glinting, eyes like coals. The figure raised a hand and pointed at me. My heart pounded as I sped away, tires kicking up dust. I drove for hours past sleeping towns and empty highways until the sea shimmered on the horizon. I found a small inn perched on cliffs, checked in, and collapsed onto the bed. The gentle roar of waves soothed me, and for the first time in days I slept. Morning brought clarity. The salt wind cooled my face as I walked along the edge of the cliff. Gulls cried overhead. I thought I could leave the demon behind. I thought the house was far enough away. But that night I woke to scratching at my door. I froze. The inn's corridor was silent, only lamplight pooling through the keyhole. I slid from the bed, heart hammering, and peered through the keyhole. Outside stood a man, tall, pale, black eyes. He wore no ring, but I recognized him by posture, by the rigid set of his shoulders. I pressed my forehead to the door and whispered, "I left you behind." He did not move. He did not speak. Then, very slowly, he raised a hand and tapped once. On the wood, one deliberate knock. Terror seized me. I backed away, tripped over the bedpost, and fell against the opposite wall. The doorknob rattled. I scrambled to the window and yanked at the curtains. Beyond the glass was not the courtyard, but the stone steps of the Hawthorne house, the attic window aglow. The man stood on the porch watching me. I banged on the window, but the glass did not break. The lamp on the table flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I heard the hinges creak. Before the door could swing in, I bolted upright in bed, heart racing, sweat drenched through pajamas. The seagulls cried outside in the dawn light. I forced myself to breathe. The inn was still. The window showed only the overflowing hedge and the garden path below, but I knew it was a lie. In the lobby that morning, I checked out without a word. The innkeeper smiled and wished me safe travels. I nodded, clutching my suitcase. My hands were stained with ink, the journal's final line printed on my palm. Now the gate is open. I drove north through wind-blasted plains and silent towns, chasing sunrise, chasing distance. Each night I parked the car, locked the doors, and sat alone, listening for the scratching, the keys jingling in a lock that no longer existed. I longer know what is real. The world has splintered into shadows and whispers. I feel the demon's breath at my back, the weight of its hand on my shoulder. All was there, pushing me forward, urging me to finish the ritual. I first saw the clown on the sidewalk one evening as I walked home. It was nearly dusk, the sky bruised purple, and I was lost in thought, wondering whether this day, like so many before it, would slip through my fingers unanswered. Then, just beyond the street lamp's halo, I saw the figure. He stood perfectly still, his shoulders squared, feet planted like stakes in the pavement, bright curls of orange hair, a painted grin stretching ear to ear, eyes ringed in black. His costume was immaculate, white silk shirt with oversized polka-dotted pants, too clean for a man who claimed to spend his life on city streets. He didn't move as I passed. Only his gaze followed me, those painted eyes glinting. I quickened my pace, but I could still feel him. Behind me, the jiggle of two big shoes, the soft whistle of a calliope tune. I refused to look back. That night I dreamed of laughter, so loud it filled my ears until I thought my skull would crack. I lay in bed listening, but when I sat up, there was only the hum of the radiator and the street noise beyond my window. The next morning, I found something on my doorstep, a single red balloon, the kind they sell at carnivals. Its string was knotted around the leg of my chair. I carried it inside, studied it. No note, no message. Just the balloon, bobbing gently as though waiting to spring toward me the moment I let my guard down. I threw it away. Later, I didn't find the balloon in the trash. The black bag was crushed and half empty, but no sign of balloon or string. I sniffed around outside. No string on the ground, no burst latex floating off in the wind. It was as if it had never existed. Over the next week, more gifts arrived. A small music box painted with bright stripes. When I wound it, a warped circus. Melody crept out, tinny and mournful. A pair of satin gloves, white and pristine, inexplicably damp to the touch. A stack of Polaroids showing my apartment, bedroom, bathroom, living room, snapshots taken from perfect angles, as though someone had wandered through the rooms unseen. I recognized every detail. The blue rug under my coffee table, the chipped mug with a gold rim, my landlord's flyer tacked beside the door. And then there was one photo I didn't recognize. The inside of my closet, dark, empty, except for a flash of orange hair and a painted grin occupying half the frame. I dropped the photos on the floor, hands trembling, and fled outside into the hall. I spent that night on the couch of my neighbor's apartment, too ashamed to explain why. I told her only I felt unsafe, that I couldn't sleep alone. She nodded sympathetically and gave me blankets, but I saw her glance at the stack of Polaroids lying on my coffee table. She didn't ask questions. I'm grateful for that. When I returned the next morning, the Polaroids were gone, vanished as if they had never been there. In their place, on the floor, was a single photograph, me lying in that neighbor's apartment, clutching a blanket, eyes wide and terrified. I left immediately, taking the subway north, looking for a change of scenery. But at every stop, at every platform, I saw him, bright clown jacket, painted grin, and the same silent stare. Sometimes he was far away, waiting near the escalator. Other times he materialized at the doorway of the train car when I opened my eyes. I held my breath until the doors opened and he slipped out. But there he was on the platform, standing behind a pillar. I wrapped my arms around my chest, pressing my back against the window. The carriage doors slid shut, leaving me alone. At my office building, I hurried through the lobby and down the corridor to my cubicle. When I reached for the coffee mug I'd left on my desk, I found it filled with confetti, tiny scraps of red, yellow, blue. A note lay on top. Smile. The handwriting was lopsided, childlike, every letter painted as though with a careless brush. I stared at it until the office grew dark and empty around me. I couldn't focus on work. I sat in the glow of my computer monitor, typing nothing, just waiting for the end of the day so I could escape. That night I took a long detour home, circling the block twice, once under a street lamp and once through alleyways lined with overflowing dumpsters. I checked every corner, every shadow. I carried an umbrella even though the sky was clear, willing it to become a weapon. But there was never a drop of rain. When I arrived home, heart pounding, I found my door ajar. I slammed my bag down, pushed. Inside, the hallway light flickered. "Hello," I called, voice tight. No answer. I flicked on every light switch. The living room rug lay in place, the couch unfluffed. The music box from before sat on the coffee table, lid flipped open. I dreaded winding it, but I did, because I needed to confirm that my mind was still my own. The melody crawled out, tinny and familiar. I dropped it. The melody carried on. The box had winded itself. I grabbed the box and threw it across the room. The porcelain spun on the hardwood unbroken until it toppled over. Its melody slowed, warping down into a groan of metal. Then silence. My ears rang. I bolted the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the floor, back against the wall. My phone lay on the coffee table. I wanted to call someone, but didn't know who. If I told the police, they'd ask for evidence. Where was the clown? There were no footprints on the sidewalk, no fingerprints on the gifts, nothing. I felt the weight of my own fear pressing harder than any stranger ever could. In the small hours, I heard laughter. It started far away, a faint chuckle, and grew nearer until it filled the room. A single clap, then another, then dozens. Applause, mocking, suffocating. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound pulsed through my bones. Then a voice, low and melodic. "Don't be sad. Be happy." The lights went out. Darkness rushed in, cold and absolute. Then I saw him, half glow of orange hair, curved grin floating in the black, face directly in front of mine, hovering inches from my own. His breath was sweet like popcorn and sugar. His eyes were empty wells. I screamed and scrambled backward, but the floor tilted and threw me against the wall. Pain flared in my side. He laughed. I heard the laughter echo as I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I was alone. The lights were still off, but morning light seeped in around the curtains. My side throbbed. I touched it. No blood, just a bruise forming under my shirt. My heart hammered. I rose and threw open every curtain, every window, but the street. Outside was empty. No sign of the clown, no balloons tied to lampposts, no confetti swirling in the breeze. I considered moving out, selling everything, and disappearing. But when I looked through rental listings, each apartment photo had the clown's face ghosted into a corner, in the hallway mirror, in a cracked tile, in a stain on the wall. I closed my laptop, shaking. I thought of returning home and hiding. But my own apartment felt like a trap. Each room was alive with memories of him. The kitchen where the gloves had appeared, the hallway where I first heard the calliope, the closet where the Polaroid had been taken. I could not stay. I packed a bag and went to the airport. Boarding a plane seemed like the ultimate escape. He could never follow me into the sky. I sat in my seat and closed my eyes as the engines roared. I breathed in his last gift, a single red balloon, drifting in the overhead bin, tied to the handle by its white string. I unknotted the string and let the balloon float up. It bobbed above my head, filling the compartment. I blinked, and it was gone. I flew for hours, crossing time zones, following the sun until it dipped below the horizon. I rented a small cottage by the water, far from any city. The waves crashed. Against the rocks, the gulls cried overhead, and for a moment I thought I was free. I unpacked my bag, laid out clothes, lit candles. No balloons, no confetti, no eerie photographs. That night, I slept. I dreamed of colors, bright colors, swirling into my vision like paint. I heard children's laughter, high and gleeful. I woke to a whisper, "Smile." I turned on the light. Behind me, on the pillow, a single card, rosy cheeks, red lips, and a painted grin that stretched wider than humanly possible. The card simply read, hand-printed in bold letters, "Here I am." I dropped the card. It fluttered onto the floor. I stared at the door. Outside, the wind carried a faint carnival tune, and once again I understood. I could run until the end of the world, but the clown would always find me, painted grin and empty eyes, gleaming in the dark, waiting to drag my... I began to notice the first signs of it on a Tuesday morning while brushing my teeth. As I stared into the foggy mirror, I saw movement behind me, just at the edge of my vision, like a stray ribbon caught on the breeze. I spun, toothbrush, clattering against the sink. But there was nothing. The empty bathroom, the tile floor, the pale light through the frosted glass window. My pulse thudded against my ribs, and I chided myself. Far too many late nights at the office, too much coffee. Yet throughout the day I felt it, a subtle weight at the back of my mind, an itch behind my eyes. At the bus stop, I thought I heard someone whisper my name, soft, hoarse, just beyond hearing. I turned, scanning the faces around me, but all eyes looked away or held polite indifference. My heart hammered, and I fumbled for my phone, clutching it like a lifeline. At work, I found my keyboard rearranged. Keys I knew by muscle memory, M and N swapped, S and D inverted, forcing me to stop and stare, my knuckles white around the edge of the desk. A spreadsheet I had left open was gone, replaced by a blank document titled Observations. I clicked on it, my mind racing, but the file was empty. A chill settled in my stomach, and I wondered if someone had accessed my computer. But who? And why? That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, willing my breathing to slow. I replayed every moment of the day, searching for clues. Whose voice whispered my name? Who rearranged my keyboard? Thought after thought circled like sharks, each one sharpening the edges of my anxiety. I felt exposed, as if every secret crease of my mind had been peeled back and examined. The next morning I awoke before my alarm. My phone screen was glowing on the nightstand, though I was certain I had turned it off. I picked it up with trembling fingers. 5 missed calls, all from my own number, and 1 voicemail. I pressed play, a breathy hiss, then my own voice, slow and distant, saying, "They're watching." The message ended. No timestamp, no background noise, just that single line. Cold tendrils of panic writhed through me. I checked the call log. The calls had come in the dead hours. 3:12 a.m., 4:07 a.m., 5:01 a.m. I sat in the dark, light from the screen paling the room around me. Someone had recorded my voice, but who had access to it? At work, I shut down my computer completely, then restarted. Every file I tried to open popped an error message. I called IT. They promised to investigate, but their voices sounded distant, distracted. As I left my cubicle for coffee, I heard keys clicking behind me. I turned. The chair was empty, the desk abandoned. The clicking continued, but I couldn't tell from where. I began to skip meetings. Each conference room felt like a trap. I avoided the break room, afraid someone would be watching the camera hidden above the coffee machine. At home, I unplugged my router, thinking it might be a hacker. The next morning, I found it reconnected. I hadn't been home. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Look outside." My heart latched in my throat. I approached the window, lifted the blind. Across the street, in the glow of a street lamp, stood a figure. Too tall to be a neighbor, draped in a long coat, face hidden in shadow. They raised an arm, beckoning. I slammed the blind down, my hand shaking. Night fell like a shroud. I locked every door and window. In the darkness, I could hear my own breath, loud in my ears. I paced the apartment, checking the locks again and again. Under the glow of a single lamp, I unpacked all my electronic devices, phones, tablets, spare hard drives, and piled them on the coffee table. I switched them off, then smashed them against the hardwood floor. Device after device cracked and died, glass spidering under the weight of fear. Silence returned for a moment. Then my landline rang. I hadn't even connected one in years. I stared at it, then answered on impulse. "Hello!" No response, just static. Then a click, and a voice so low I thought it was the hum of death itself. "You can't break free." I hung up. My hand shook so violently I dropped the receiver. The line stayed open. A whisper trailed through the noise. "I'm here." I ran to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror's reflection, I saw movement. Again, there, behind me in the corridor's gloom, was a dark shape. I spun, towel clutched to my chest. But nothing. I knew then that it was no external hacker, no prankster. It was something inside me, or something that had invaded me. Paranoia bloomed in my mind like a malignant flower, roots burrowing deep. Every shadow felt alive, every stranger a threat. I began to hear footsteps in empty rooms, my own echo following me down hallways. I saw reflections in windows that didn't match my posture. I stopped telling anyone. My friends called and asked why I didn't return calls. I said I was busy, that sleep was catching up. I didn't want them to come over. I was ashamed to admit I feared my own mind. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down every anomaly, time, stamps, overheard words, strange occurrences, pages filled with entries. 3:12 a.m. Voicemail? They're watching. Keyboard key swapped. Figure across street. Landline. You can't break free. The notebook became a map of my unraveling, each line a scar across the page. Then came the dream.